Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of TERI, I, Riya Mohal, welcome you once again to the 23rd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating discourse on climate change and sustainability. We will now be beginning with the leadership panel, Integrating Sustainable Development for Collective Action. I would now request the chair of the session, Dr. Pradipto Ghosh, Distinguished Fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute, to please join me at the stage. Can we have a round of applause, please? Thank you, sir. Our next panelist is Mr. Manish Bapna, President and CEO, Natural Resources Defense Council. Our next panelist, Ms. Abanti Shankar Narayanan, Chief Group Public Affairs Officer and member of the Group Executive Board at Mahindra Group. Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Ms. Vaishnavi Prabhakaran, Head Sustainability at Tata Power Corporation Limited. And our next speaker is Dr. Akanksha Chaure, Director, IT Power Private Limited. Thank you to all the panelists and chair. As part of this leadership panel, we also have two pre-recorded messages as part of the leadership address of His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon and from Dr. Achim Steiner, Administrator, United Nations Development Program. I would now request a pre-recorded message of His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the United Nations and President of the Global Green Growth Institute, to be played.
Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Namaste. I am privileged to deliver these remarks at the 23rd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, which is organized by the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI. Looking back, I had the honor to be a part of this summit in 2009 when my good friend, the late Dr. R.K. Pachauri, served as Director General of the TERI. The deliberations at this summit continue to play a significant role in shaping global sustainable pathways. At the start of 2024, as we convene to discuss pressing global concerns on climate change and sustainable development, I am reminded of the profound interconnectedness within the international community. Indeed, in a world marked by unprecedented challenges related to global warming and ongoing threats to world peace, it is critical to unite in our shared commitment to foster sustainability and equity for all people and planet. And I firmly believe this timely summit provides a vital platform to reflect on the challenges, solutions, actions, and commitments of the global community. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as per the IPCC Climate Change Synthesis Report 2023, human actions have indisputably led to global warming, resulting in the global surface temperature rising by 1.1 degree Celsius above 1850-1900 average during the 2011-2020 period. The persistently surging global greenhouse gas emissions stems from unsustainable energy use and varied patterns of consumption and production between and within countries and among individuals. The impact of climate change is evident in its far-reaching consequences. The atmosphere, oceans, cryosphere, and biosphere have all undergone extensive and abrupt changes. In consequence, climate change is seriously threatening economic stability and national security. Science has made it clear the political will is urgently needed. I encourage the major economic powers to show leadership. At the same time, industrialized countries have historical responsibilities in addressing climate change. Thus, they must equitably lead the charge in solving this deepening global crisis. These countries have the financial and technological resources to do so, and emerging nations should be encouraged to use such resources. Vulnerable countries that have contributed the least to the current climate crisis are in fact the most disproportionately impacted by it. According to the UNEP's Adaptation Gap Report 2023, climate adaptation is faltering on all its fronts, just as it ought to be accelerating to keep pace with the growing challenges. This is especially true for developing nations who have few resources available for climate adaptation. Strengthening agro-food systems is another key area that necessitates further consideration and enhanced action. The resilience of such systems is crucial, particularly for smallholder farmers in the global south. Indeed, less than 2% of global climate finance is allocated towards the consequential adaptation efforts of smallholder farmers, even though more than 2 billion people rely on them for their livelihoods and sustenance. The framework to address these global challenges needs to have clear and measurable goals so we can all monitor their progress over time. It also should include implementation strategies such as funding and technology transfer to ensure that the framework is effectively delivered. Without robust global action and elevated political will, climate crisis will only worsen further. No one nation can combat climate change or accomplish green growth alone, however rich and powerful it may be. Therefore, global solutions and multilateral actions are urgently needed. In this connection, reinvigorated global leadership for sustainable development and climate justice is an absolute must. It is crucial to motivate young change makers and promote leadership for the realization of the landmark Paris Climate Change Agreement and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, guided by the spirit of collaboration and shared responsibility, let us embark on a journey of dialogue and action that transcends borders, ideologies, and differences. I continue to firmly believe that together we can build a greener, more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive world for generations to come. I will conclude by issuing a warning that time is running out. The more we delay, the more we should pay. I reiterate my heartfelt congratulations on the occasion of the 23rd World Sustainable Development Summit and wish you all great success. Thank you. Dhanyawad.
Our next leadership address is from Dr. Achim Steiner, Administrator, United Nations Development Programme.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is my privilege to join the 2024 World Sustainable Development Summit by way of this video message. At the outset, and on behalf of the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, I would like to extend my sincere congratulations to colleagues and friends at the Energy and Resources Institute as it celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. What an anniversary, what a track record. Over that time, it has created a space for innovative perspectives, questioned long-held beliefs, and sparked bold new initiatives within the realms of energy, the environment, and sustainable development. Perhaps never before has the Institute's mission been so vital. Our natural world has been pushed to the brink of no return. As climate change intensifies, lives and livelihoods continue to be changed irrevocably. The Act for Earth manifesto, which emerged at last year's summit, reflects a truth that change is possible if enough individuals can in fact be mobilized to take action. Moreover, in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that you're all familiar with, we have a clear vision of what a greener, a more sustainable and inclusive world can look like. So how can we ensure that sustainability becomes part of the genetic code of our societies and economies? In this respect, let me share 3 vectors of transformation with you. First, we must build on the positive signals from COP28, where agreement was reached to transition away from fossil fuels that are driving climate change, while a critical mass of countries pledged to triple the world's renewable energy capacity by 2030. UNDP has already supported 85% of all developing countries to enhance their nationally determined contributions as part of our Climate Promise initiative. And through our Nature Pledge, we are supporting over 140 countries to put the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework into action. That includes changing narratives and behaviors and placing nature at the heart of development and across sectors including governance, justice, economics, finance, health, and conservation. Crucially, we're also working alongside the private sector to ensure that sustainability is not just an add-on to business, but an intrinsic part of how all business is done. Second, all countries must be able to play their part in a just energy transition that represents both an exit strategy from the climate crisis and new opportunities for millions of people. At UNDP, one of our key objectives is to address the staggering imbalance in global investments in renewable energy, especially in developing countries. Through our Sustainable Energy Hub, we are helping to de-risk clean energy financing and channel new investments to least developed countries and emerging economies. With our partners, we are also advancing bold new solar initiatives like the Africa Mini-Grids program. Being rolled out in 21 countries on the continent of Africa, this is a $65 billion investment opportunity to ultimately assist in connecting 265 million people to clean, affordable electricity, driving forward human development. Finally, we must unlock the immense potential of technology and human ingenuity, including of women and young people, to drive systems change. This is the thinking behind the UNDP Accelerator Labs network, which is now working alongside communities and governments in 115 countries to help surface and scale up answers to SDG challenges and everyday livelihood opportunities. With key partners like India, UNDP is also working to support the development of digital public infrastructure across the globe, which is becoming the basis for new digital solutions that could accelerate progress on, yes, 70% of the SDG targets and indicators. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, with a recognition that advancing sustainability is both a science and an art, UNDP is committed to help advance the spirit of the Act for Earth manifesto. As we confront the repercussions of a planetary crisis instigated by humanity, we must also be cognizant of the fact that in our collective humanity, extraordinary technology and new streams of finance, we possess the means to carve a pathway out of our multiple crises towards a more sustainable world for all. This is the meaning of living in the age of the Anthropocene. In that vein, I wish you a most productive summit. Thank you so much for inviting me to address you.
We will now open the panel discussion, and I would like the chair of the session, Dr. Pradipto Ghosh, to open the session.
Thank you so much. Distinguished panelists and participants in the WSDS 2024. The theme of this session is integrating sustainable development and collective action. And the overarching question that we would like to ask the executive leadership panel is the following. What kind of tools can further vertical and horizontal integration of sustainable development for collective action? Now, when we speak of collective action, some further questions arise. First, which are the collectives that will be engaged in the effort at realizing the SDG targets? Second, how do we ensure coordination and synergy between the efforts? Now, human society is comprised of collectives. The family, kinship groups, non-government organizations, and these are in the community sphere. And in the sphere of economic activity, we have partnership enterprises, corporates, and cooperatives. And of course, in the government sphere, we have local, state, and central governments and their constituent ministries and departments, as well as international public organizations. Now, each of these collectives may be engaged in actions to realize the SDG targets. However, only a small set of SDGs may be implemented by each. For example, a steel plant in the corporate sector may address SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 13, climate action. It cannot address directly all or most of the 17 SDGs. The second thing we have to recognize is that there are important complementarities between the different SDGs. For example, SDG 3, good health and well-being, includes zero hunger, which is SDG 3, absence of poverty, SDG 1, gender justice, SDG 5, clean water and sanitation, SDG 6, affordable and clean energy, SDG 7, sustainable cities and communities, SDG 11, sustainable consumption and production, SDG 12. Now, all of these may be implemented through different classes of collectives. How do we ensure that the actions of the collectives are in sync? We have a number of tools, and of course I hope that the members of the panel will address some of these tools. Now, I'll just give some examples of these tools. For example, in public finance, we have green budgeting, and in which each agency identifies and reports to the legislature the percentages of budgets intended to realize specific SDGs. In respect of corporate finance, the financing agencies may specify and monitor the use of funds for specific SDGs, and corporates may mandatorily report these in their annual reports in standardized formats. With respect to the broader community, information, education, communication, and sustainable habits, sustainable practices may be hardwired, for example, right from the school-going age. Now, within formal organizations such as corporates and governments, communication across silos is always difficult. However, each organization does have mechanisms for, for ensuring horizontal and vertical communication. And these mechanisms may be relied upon as well to ensure that the SDG targets with respect to each vertical and at the different levels, are also tracked and their progress recorded. However, the authorities responsible for oversight of these organizations, for example, the boards in the case of corporates, the cabinet in the case of governments, must be fully committed. The main point is this: realizing the SDGs must not be a peripheral activity for the collectives. It should be part of their main agenda, their very raison d'etre. This requires enlightened leadership. So now I would like to invite our first panelist. This is Ms. Vaishnavi Prabhakaran. She is Head of Sustainability in Tata Power. So, Vaishnavi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Yeah. A very good morning to all of you, and thank you for having me here today. I think a lovely introduction to this topic, and important for us to realize that sustainability leadership is something that can happen only in a collective format. I would like to look at this entire concept under the 3 P's of principles, programs, and projects. First of all, it is important for us to be steadfast in our principles and understand that there needs to be a definitive outcome that we are working towards. And that is where the SDG goals play an important role. So at the Tata Group and within Tata Power, I think this is an important alignment that has already happened. And out of the 17 SDGs, there are 10 that are prioritized. Tata Power in itself plays a very important role in SDG 7, which is clean and affordable power. And that is a transition that we have committed wholeheartedly to. So there is no growth that is going to happen through the thermal route, and this is a promise that we made 4 years back or 5 years back. So leadership in the space of sustainability was something that we had already committed to. So there is only clean and green generation capacity that is going to be added to the portfolio. We are also ambitious in setting out our principles. When we say that we are going to be carbon net zero before 2045, I think that is a very aspirational time frame that we are looking at. When we are looking at India as a context, just for a comparative, it is 2070 that the country has committed to. So therefore, I think a very central part is alignment to principles, whether they be SDGs or the sustainability aspirations that we set out. The second important aspect of achieving this is through large-scale programs. So at the Tata Group, there is Project Alingana, which is embracing sustainability, and which means that all the large Tata organizations have committed to certain targets, and which means that every business decision that is going to be taken is going to be in light of these commitments. There is also, I think, when we talk about programs, I think a very important aspect that was alluded to is education. So we had large programs like Club Energy, where we work with school children for the past decade and a half in terms of reverse parenting in energy and resource conservation. We work as climate crew with our employees, stakeholders, to be able to imbibe the targets that have been set out in Mission Life. So large programs, I think, create that horizontal reach that is required to be able to bring uniformity in understanding and implementation. When we are looking at leadership, I think there is another aspect that comes across where we need to work as collaboratives. So when we are working through Tata Trust, Tata Power Community Development Trust, or when we are working through collective approaches with industry forums like TERI, CII, FICCI, etc. These are collectives which allow us to work collaboratively and bring different stakeholders on the same plane in terms of delivering the objectives. It is not going to happen in isolation, and that's something that we are very cognizant of. We also look at industry partnerships, so we work very closely with foundations like ICICI Foundation, Godrej for mangrove conservation, wetland conservation, etc. So when we are looking at principles and programs, I think the third part that comes towards is a deep dive in terms of projects. So what are the force motives that are going to make a difference in this journey? I think very important to recognize that innovation and technology is what is shifting the direction of what the utility of the future is looking like. So we have the Center for Innovation that we have with the Government of India and the Tata Trust, where we are incubating entrepreneurs for clean energy space. We are also looking at skill development through Tata Power Skill Development Institute, where we are looking at just transitions and skilling as a format to enabling this transition, not just within the organization, but collaboratively and systematically in the industry itself. When we are looking beyond in terms of projects, we are also working on transparency and reporting. So I think there is a huge need for convergence in how this sustainability information is reported. So BRSR with SEBI mandate coming in, and commitments such as SBTI, TCFD, these are absolutely critical in terms of how companies' actions or outcomes of their actions are seen in the public space. So now, having said that, I think it is also important to recognize that sorry for the So I think having said all of this, I would like just to summarize that having horizontal reach with vertical depth can be achieved only when we have steadfast principles, bold programs, and passionate projects, and that cannot happen individually. That needs to happen collectively.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. And rather than trying to summarize what you said, let me turn to the next speaker. This is Ms. Akanksha Chaudhary. She is Director, IT Power Private Limited and a former colleague at TERI. So, Akanksha, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Good morning, good afternoon. Let me start by quoting E.F. Schumacher, an economist of small is beautiful fame, and I quote, "Today we suffer from an almost universal idolatry of gigantism. It is therefore necessary to insist on the virtues of smallness where this applies." If I were to contextualize his statement into today's theme, I would say that in our quest of meeting gigantic gigawatt targets, we have ignored and overlooked the contribution of small watts and negawatts, a term that is coined by Emery Lovins. Negawatts is negative energy conservation. So I choose to anchor my comments on this decentralized renewable energy systems, DRE, which represent both small watts as well as negawatts. So, to elaborate it further, I would take an example, specific example of northeastern region of our country, which comprises of 8 states, now Sikkim being the brother state. This region has tremendous potential of growth of its rural livelihoods sector, particularly on account of its very rich natural resources and also a strategic gateway of markets to South Asia and Southeast Asia. In this region, most of the population is tribal and rural, and agriculture is their most important source of livelihood. However, the mechanization and the adoption of modern technologies in agriculture is abysmally low as compared to any statistics that you pick up at the regional level or at the country level or national level. Now, there are several reasons, awareness, affordability, etc. But one of the important reasons of this low mechanization is the lack of reliable electricity supply. So these regions are considered as weak grid regions, which basically means that they are connected electrically. I mean, they have the infrastructure, but the supply is very poor, as a result of which diesel generator or no access is the current scenario. Now, agriculture and particularly horticulture, which depends a lot on, which has a lot of perishable products, byproducts, suffers a lot because of lack of processing facilities and also the storage facilities. To give you an example, pineapple, which is the primary product of Meghalaya, state of Meghalaya, 30% is wasted because of lack of infrastructure and storage facilities. Now, DRE has the ability, DRE, Decentralized Renewable Energy Systems, has the ability to fill this energy gap and thereby take the region on a sustainable development path. But unfortunately, DRE is on the fringes of the discourse of planning, implementation of rural livelihood sector or the overall economic sectors which contribute to GSDP or state GDP in this region. Why? I am not going to elaborate on the reasons, but I would rather focus on the solutions. And three solutions or the solutions depend on three pillars or three components, as we as a couple of organizations which conducted a thorough research very recently, which will be available in public domain soon. So, we focused on three pillars, and the first pillar is the policy convergence at the center and at the state level, particularly the schemes and policies dealing with clean energy, with food processing, with MSME, with ecotourism and a couple of other similar. Basically to ensure that the policy directives, the policy objectives, the policy's language, which are at the central level, and when they translate into the state level, and when they combine with the state level, they work towards the common vision. So, the convergence. The second pillar is the interdepartmental cooperation between the state and at the district level. You pick up Department of Horticulture, you pick up Rural State Livelihoods Mission, you pick up Department of New and Renewable Energy, you pick up skill development at the state level, district administration, all these departments work in silos. So, it is very important for interdepartmental cooperation to ensure that the resources which are lying in the silos are optimally utilized. There are synergies of efforts, and most importantly, there is an opportunity for cross learning of good practices as well as mistakes. I mean, on a lighter side, you will very often hear from one department saying that, oh, our triest with DRE, it failed, we somehow were not very confident about it, which is a very common statement that you hear. And the third pillar is collaboration with the grassroots level organizations, particularly in the northeastern region, where the churches, the faith-based organizations, the community groups, the village councils, the district administration, the NGOs are working very closely, and they have a lot of influencing power, and they are the ones who can facilitate the integration of DRE into the sectors which contribute to GSDP. With this I conclude, but I will go back to Schumacher. So, Schumacher proposed a system of intermediate technology based on smaller working units, community ownership and regional workplaces utilizing local labor and resources. I think very apt today. Incidentally, IT Power, the company that I represent, is proud to have its legacy into Intermediate Technology Development Group, ITDG, which was founded by Schumacher. IT Power, the IT stands for Intermediate Technology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Akanksha. And our next speaker is Ms. Abanti Shankaranarayan. She is Chief Group Public Affairs Officer and member of the Group Executive Board of the Mahindra Group. So, Abanti, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just checking if I'm audible. Yes, okay. So maybe I will start with the broad answer, which is today there is recognition that a global problem like what we face on both SDGs and particularly with climate actions and the climate crisis requires global solutions, collaboration and partnership. In fact, even at Davos a couple of weeks ago, although economic affairs and business generally is, the pivot of the conversations, climate crisis and collaboration and partnership were absolutely at the heart of all the discussions and conversations. So I think there is absolutely no doubt that for the kind of problem that we are facing as a planet today, you need vertical, horizontal. If there was any other word, I would add that also, but you absolutely need collaboration. So, and I think that's needed at 3 levels. So let me start first with the microcosmic level of a corporation. And let me say that within the best progressive, leading, global ESG leading companies like the Mahindra Group, I think the role of sustainability itself has had a remarkable shift in the last 2 or 3 years. And that shift is one where sustainability has stepped out of being the mandate for a small, typically a small team called CSR and sustainability, which tended to operate most closely with the manufacturing and operations side of the business, to one where sustainability is now a mainstream leadership and business conversation. And therefore, the role of sustainability folks itself has changed to one where you have to bring different functions, many of them frontline, into the discussions, into targets, into actions, and so build really horizontal collaboration across different departments who otherwise would typically think sustainability is not my job, it's somebody else's job, right? And so if I think about what we are doing as Mahindra towards that collaboration within the corporation itself.
Check.
Is there a problem with the audio? 22? Yeah, okay, you can, okay. All right, so let me press on. So I think, for us, sustainability is now a topic of the leadership. We have something called the Sustainability Council, which is led by the group MD and CEO, and it has CEOs of all the key businesses in our multi-sector group as members. And that committee or that council meets every month, reviews, looks at new actions, tracks our delivery towards commitments, and really shares best practices across different companies. So that's the tone from the top and actions from the top that drive the rest of the group. We are also moving away from an emphasis just on the traditional net zero in terms of emissions, scope 1 and 2, waste and water, to actually more difficult and trickier subjects. For example, decarbonizing the supply chain, for which we have within our largest business, the auto and farm business, actually started last year by bringing suppliers into the conversation of climate, of sustainability, and what actions they can do. And that's a big shift, because you would typically talk to suppliers about quality, cost, and delivery timelines. Now we are starting to talk sustainability. So I think those are the kind of big shifts that are happening within a corporation, both internally between different departments, but also with other ecosystem players, including suppliers. I will then move to government. I think from our experience and what we see in sectors such as solar as well as green mobility, we see that the government has and in fact is playing a very strong role in terms of giving big policy sort of enablers for the development of transition and green solutions in critical sectors. So if you look at electric vehicles, there is FAME, there is production-linked incentive, there are GST concessions for electric vehicles, just as an example. Obviously, a lot more needs to be done. So, for example, setting up on-scale public charging infrastructure is something where the government has to really play a role. And industry then has the role to sit with the government and say, look, these are the things that you've done, that's great, but here are a few more things that you need to do, here are things that we need to do. So that's the government part. I think green procurement is again a big lever that the government has, And I think that again is a role that they can play. And the final part of the collaboration is really at a multilateral level between nations and countries on finance, on technology, and on what one of my co-panelists said, on really simpler and harmonized reporting standards as well as rating frameworks. So I think 3 layers, therefore, of cooperation and collaboration within a corporation, national governments, and then international collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Abanti. And our last speaker this afternoon is Mr. Manish Bapna. He is President and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council. So, Mr. Bapna, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. Really warm gratitude to TERI for organizing this conference, and to my fellow panelists. Really appreciated your comments. I want to take a step back and just kind of get a sense in the room. I mean, all of us are here because we're so deeply committed to this agenda to act on Earth. We're committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, to climate change. Many of us have dedicated our lives to this agenda. And I want you to think a little bit about where you were 2 or 3 years ago and where you are today. And I want to get a show of hands around whether you're feeling more positive about our ability to tackle climate change, to address sustainable development, or less positive compared to 2 or 3 years ago. So I'd like to just kind of get a show of hands. How many of you are feeling more positive today than you may have been 2 or 3 years ago? And how many of you are feeling less positive? So there's some enthusiasm, right? There's some real enthusiasm in this room. And I think what we've seen over the past 10 years is some real momentum on this issue. If you think about back in 2015, the run-up to 2015, we were wondering, would we have a sustainable development agenda? Would we have a climate agreement? We were able at that point in time to really actually move the agenda forward, set some ambitious global goals. In the time since then, there's been a lot of focus on policy, right? How do we put in place policy to enable us to actually achieve these goals? But when I think about where we are today and why this particular session is so important, the real challenge now is the gap between policy and implementation, right? We all have strong goals that the world has agreed to. Increasingly, countries have strong policies in place that, if followed, will get us towards those goals. But the real challenge that we're seeing all around the world is in implementation. And the reason why that is going to be perhaps the biggest challenge is because implementation is tough. It's actually tough to translate policy into real projects on the ground. And so this point about integration, vertical and horizontal integration, is at the heart of how we can actually implement effectively. What you've heard in all the stories from my panelists are real-world challenges around implementation. Let me just give you 2 more examples. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We are a large global environmental organization. We've been working on some of the challenges on implementation for decades. We've been looking a lot about how to deploy clean energy at speed and scale, right? There's a lot of strong policy in place, but what are the actual on-the-ground challenges? Where do we find land, for example, to deploy solar, wind at scale? And what are the challenges in having different ministries, different departments, different levels of government talk to each other to find adequate land? When we think about transmission in India, in the United States, in most countries, transmission has to cross multiple states, multiple provinces. How do you actually get different states to talk to each other to create transmission? When you think a little bit about local community benefits, one of the biggest challenges to deploying clean energy projects is whether or not local communities benefit from those projects. And if they don't, they will oppose those projects. You heard from some of my colleagues today some of the cooperation that has to happen between the public sector and the private sector to make that happen. We have worked as NRDC a lot on heat action plans in India. We've been working on this for 10 years. Heat action plans at the city level in India require different groups within a city jurisdiction to come together to develop heat action plans effectively. If you really want to scale in India, it has to be not only at the district or state level, how does the role of federal agencies come to play? What I think we've heard all in today comes to a very fundamental truth, which is that implementation hinges on the ability to create strong, durable institutions. And this is something that we tend to not spend enough time on. We talk about money, we talk about technology and innovation, but to get implementation done well, we have to focus on institutions, how to create the right institutions at different levels that enable us to actually address the implementation barriers. And so I just want to leave you with why this session, why this point about vertical and horizontal integration is so profoundly important for this agenda. Because unless we build institutions that enable different departments or sectors within government, different levels of government, the public and private sector, all of society to be able to come together in a more seamless way to tackle these problems, we will never implement fast enough. And if we don't implement fast enough, all the effort on strong goals and good policy will be wasted. So that's why I think this session and these examples are so important to move the agenda forward. So with that, thank you.
Well, thank you, Manish. And we've had 4 outstanding presentations in this session. And if I can just try in one sentence to try and capture this, it is that all the speakers focused on the question of integration, coordination, both vertical and horizontal. The corporates spoke about within corporates and government, and governments and international. Also we had one of the speakers talk about coordination between community-based organizations and the government and the corporate sector. So we've had a very rich set of presentations here. Now, since there's a little time, I would like to throw the floor open to questions. It has to be a question, not a comment. So you have the floor. So I see quite a few hands. So the gentleman in the green outfit. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ashish Sharma. I'm air quality scientist with my startup based in London, and I'm working with WRI as well. So I have 2 questions. I won't take too long. One is about, this is from past session also, the landscape of ESG for SMEs and MSMEs in India. It almost seems to me, with little bit of my sort of personal struggle after coming from London, that there is almost, with my limited sample size, there is a missing market for ESG, particularly in the context of SMEs and MSMEs in India. What we always end up doing is just chasing, hand-holding, and a lot of free awareness sort of, consultations. My second question is, so based on this, is there a need to make it compulsory for small and medium-scale enterprises for the disclosure of their emissions and how they can regulate those? And obviously, we can go for and opt for science-based targets where we focus on scope 3, scope 1, scope 2 emissions. My second question is more along the expertise of Ms. Akansha. So while we were in UK, we used to hear a lot about faith-based leadership. I was at COP26 in Glasgow. So I had this fortune to attend some of the sessions. So in India, it seems, I think we should, in a much better way, utilize these, faith-based and such leadership sort of organizations in order to raise awareness about how everyone can play their share. Now, with the lack of awareness, let's say if anyone talks about, let's say, a vegan diet or vegetarianism, very soon it boils down to some sort of, religious sort of improvisation. But it may not be the case. People may just be making a case that when the whole of the Scandinavian countries are shifting towards a vegan diet, then, I mean, small and effective behavioral changes,
please
so
come to your
some
question.
sort of awareness, I mean, the landscape of, role of faith-based leadership in India and how we can make it useful for personalized behavioral changes so that we minimize sort of, personal carbon footprint. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So you'd like to take the first question?
Yeah.
Naman?
So I agree that MSMEs are not as much on the whole ESG piece of action or agenda as the large corporations. And the reason is large corporations generally are much more subject to scrutiny. There are investors who demand actions, there are activists, governments, etc. But I think the dial has started shifting, and again, large corporations are helping in MSMEs coming to that ESG agenda. So for example, Mahindra as well as many other large corporations are asking their suppliers, many of whom are MSMEs, to start looking at this space more seriously and actually run, so again, actually start by running foundational knowledge programs on ESG, sustainability, identify easy, lower hanging fruit actions that some of these MSME suppliers can take. Second, reporting is also going to play a role. In the latest BRSR guidelines, the top 1,000 companies have to also disclose value chain, 75%, contributing to 75% of the turnover. Value chain partners disclosure matrices are also included. So as you start measuring and reporting, actions will follow.
Right. Thank you. So would you like to take the second question? Or would you like to add this one? Okay.
So I think, what we also have to recognize is when we had the show of hands on the enthusiasm and sustainability today, there is a perceptible shift in how sustainability is looked at. So sustainability today is good business, which means that SMEs and MSMEs are not only paying catch up, but they are also looking at it as an opportunity for new business associations. So I think ear to the ground, very soon, I think that the gap is not going to be as much, because at the end of the day, it is a directional shift which all of us are aligned to. So while there is an enabling ecosystem that needs to be created, and there is no doubt about that, because resources and what are the means that are available to the smaller players at play is something to be considered, but it is a definitive business opportunity that MSMEs and SMEs are looking at.
Okay. Thank you. And the second question?
Sir, I have a question. Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Vandana Singh, and I am representing Tata Projects here today.
Just 1 second, let me answer, right? Yeah. I know Dr. Ghosh cannot see you, so I'll make sure that your question is taken up. But let me just answer, because he had a question. So the point that I was trying to make is the collaboration, the impact of collaborating with the grassroots organizations, whether it is faith-based, just one of the examples, or village community councils, or NGOs, or the community groups, because ultimately when we are providing solution to the people, then people's representation is very, very important, and that was the point that I was making.
Thank you. Was the lady there? Yes, please.
Dr. Ghosh, yeah. There was a question.
Yeah, but
she rose her hand before.
Yeah, this lady had a hand up first.
I had a short question only to Akanksha, because you mentioned about in the Meghalaya, you gave example, for example, of the pineapple crops, they get destroyed 30% because of lack of storage. So if you do implement storage, then won't it bring up the price of the product? Wouldn't it be easier to just send it to the markets and have it fresh? And storing part of the food value anyway gets lost. And like I said, it would bring up the cost of the product itself. Yeah.
I don't have the the numbers readily available with me, but if I remember, the pineapple, and I've seen it, pineapple which is sold at literally 10 rupees per kg. The value addition can bring it to 18 times more, 180 rupees per kg. And you know, you will be appalled to see the wastage of pineapple, which I have seen with my own eyes just a few months back. There, the wastage of pineapple versus, I mean, every part of pineapple is wasted. So it's only a relative question between how much more you spend to provide processing facilities, storage facilities versus what cost, I mean cost versus benefits. Is the benefits which are heavier than the cost.
Okay, thank you. And there was a lady here who had a question, and
yes,
that's the last question.
Yes, sir. I would like to add to Prabhakaran ma'am and Shankar Narayana ma'am that you were speaking about what your corporate is doing towards achieving the sustainable goal and all. Our company too is targeting net zero by 2045. And we are in sustainability since past 11 years. Yes, yes, sir. My question is that still we are struggling, ma'am. It will not be done till it comes from the heart of the persons who are in the corporate level. We have to work with project teams also, but they are more taking it as a burden than responsibility. Then what should we do so that it will come from their inside that no, we have to do it? Because whenever we go for the implementation of what KPIs we are targeting, they start talking about budgets and all and all, and like we'll discuss later on. So how could it will come from inside, ma'am?
So Abanti will answer this question.
Yeah. So look, I think it's a combination of factors. One is it's critical that this comes actually as a very important executive focus and tone from the top, and leadership saying that this is important and continuing to say it's important is very important, basically, right? The same way that all the other business actions happen, because the leadership of a company which sets out the vision and mission and the plans for the year and all of that, everything then goes down the line, right? So I think that leadership focus is important. Second is you have to also, lead through inspiration. It's not like you can just give a diktat and then people will start focusing on sustainability. So we have to, as sustainability leaders, I think that's a big role, and that's again a big shift. You have to influence without authority, not just do. And I think that is a big leadership shift that the sustainability teams have to do. Yeah. And the third one, if I might add, is in many companies, including ours, if you bring ESG goal into business goals as well as incentives, then people start taking it more seriously because it affects them personally.
So can I give a small example?
Okay, yeah.
Just to make it very clear. You know, when we started renewable power generation, I think in 2009, I believe the cost of generation for solar panel was about 18 rupees per unit or upwards. And today, it is the most competitive power that is there, which is under 2.5 rupees per unit, right? So I think while sustainability may start out as a leadership mandate or a direction, I think it is very important for us to have the customer focus and explain why it makes sense for them to move in that direction, where it might lead them. So that risk and opportunity analysis and laying it down in black and white in terms of numbers is extremely important.
Right. Thank you, Vaishnavi. And I think, we have come to the conclusion of this particular session, and I would like to thank our eminent speakers and the participants of this second leadership forum for their excellent presentation, and second for the animated discussion that we had. Now I believe there's a release of a policy brief, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, and to all the panelists, and as well as to His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon and Dr. Achim Steiner for sharing their perspectives on how the 2030 agenda needs to be fulfilled. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have the launch of the SDG Blueprint for Sustainable Agriculture. The SDG Blueprint aims to inform an integrated approach on how sustainable agriculture can be implemented at the national level in India. The blueprint views agriculture through the lens of sustainable development, climate action, value chain, and multi-stakeholder approaches for sustainable agriculture to help contribute towards food security, livelihoods, and ecosystem integrity. The blueprint was developed through tools such as stakeholder mapping, systematic literature review, and stakeholder validation to help inform policy and praxis on the issue of sustainable development. I would kindly request representatives of the Norway Embassy, Ms. Marriott Strand, Councillor, Mr. Vivek Kumar, Senior Advisor, as well as the panelists and the authors of the SDG blueprint, Ms. Madhubarna, Ms. Palak Khanna, Dr. Shelly Kedia, Ms. Shivangi Raj, and Dr. Manish Kumar to please join us on the floor for the launch of the blueprint.
I have to add here that it's marvelous to see, you know, the male gender outnumbered in any area. So this is great to see. Well done.
I would like to once again thank our speakers and the audience for joining us for this session. And I hope the audience posted about the session on social media, and while posting about it, please use the hashtags WSDS 2024 and hashtag Act for Earth.